I just want to say thanks so much for everyone who submitted their pitches. That was really great. We've been chatting a little bit in the group, but mostly one-on-one, which I think has been very, very interesting. And people have sent in their pitches, and I've been kind of giving people feedback. And I think that's really useful. Hopefully you've found it useful. Some of you have let me know that it's worthwhile, and that you've kind of learned something from it. Just if you guys are coming into the, sorry about this, but if you're coming into the Zoom call, can you drop out of the WhatsApp call so we don't have duplicates on both of those things? And if you're not speaking in the WhatsApp call, can you mute yourself, because there's still some background sound coming through. So today we're just gonna leave some opportunity for people to ask questions like yesterday. First of all, I just wanted to ask if anyone had any thoughts on the task that they did for today. That you handed in your pitches and the feedback that we've kind of been speaking about. If anyone wanted to give any sort of group feedback on that, that would be really helpful. So let me know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Anyone got anything to say, or want to kind of give any thoughts that you might have in any shape or form?
Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Yes. My thinking was with regards to the duration of the podcast and the length, and obviously how many is in a series. I dabbled in it, and it wasn't very successful at all. And the feedback that I got from the editor from the radio station was that people don't really like to listen to podcasts that are over 12 to 15 minutes. So
okay.
Yes, so it's just to take a story and put it into a narrative that spans about 30 minutes or longer over 6 episodes. Do you not think that is quite challenging to keep the reader engaged? I mean, the listener engaged?
Yeah, well, I guess it's definitely a huge challenge, but I guess that's kind of what we're trying to tackle with in that way, right? Yes. This is kind of a good way, if your other option in something that's a bit more complicated, in that something that's kind of needs a lot of time, is often like a book format, right? So if you don't, that's almost like an overshoot for some stories, and you can kind of feel that in some books that you read. They're like, this didn't have to be a book. But this is a way to kind of, I'm not suggesting that you stretch a story out to kind of fill that, but this idea that if a story is like, warrants it and is pretty complicated and has a lot of characters and depth to it that you want to express, it's a good way to do it. And I understand that in terms of people feeling, there's a sort of old school idea that people have low attention spans, and that that people can't, everything has to be as short as possible. But like, most podcasts now are, a lot of them are single stories, especially when it comes to like investigative journalism. They're like single stories over like many episodes, and people do listen to them. But I totally agree that it's like, and hopefully that's what we'll kind of dig into in this course, is like, it is a real challenge. And you can feel when some podcast series that do this, someone has told them to do 6 episodes, and you're like, maybe this could have been 12 minutes, So I'm not saying, I guess my point is like more that not every story can do this. Like, not every story in the same way can be a book, and not every story can be 6 episodes. But if you do have the material and the sort of scope for a story, then like that's the first step. And then to kind of use this kind of narrative scripting and all those kinds of things to kind of keep it going, I think people will listen. But but there obviously are, there's obviously different formats, and there's lots of that around. What did your editor sort of say? Like, was it just sort of like, no, people won't listen beyond 12 minutes? Was that sort of the idea?
Oh, he was brutal. Put me on podcast for like a
Right.
year. He basically, they did analytics, and they said that with what he has a team that looked at the analytics and how many people listened and that, and he just said that people nowadays, obviously with this whole technology evolution, they just want to consume news, but not long drawn out. So he basically said we had to chop it down, and I cut down the story a lot, which took out the substance of it, but he still wasn't happy with 15 minutes. It was like too long. I mean, ideally, he said on radio, because they ran it on the radio station, he said 7 minutes is like even pushing it.
Yeah.
So, I think it's obviously a different platform when you're doing a podcast on radio as opposed to another platform like Spotify. So it's just interesting.
It is a very interesting thing. And it's true. Like, if you're kind of delving into that, like, single digits kind of minutes, then something can kind of drag, ironically, when it's like, when you're not kind of laying the groundwork and the expectations that, like, this is going to be a long, like, complex story, like almost, like a documentary that you would watch over multiple episodes on Netflix or something like that, as a docu-series, but in audio.
Yes.
But yeah, I totally sympathize, and it is a challenge, and it is that kind of thing where I'm sorry to hear that it kind of put you off.
No, it was an investigative series, and I think I did it more justice when I put it on the print. But anyway, I thought it would have been a better. We were trying to look at reaching another audience, so we tried the podcast. I think there's still a big market for it, but it's just doing it right.
Yeah, it is very difficult, and it's almost like you kind of have to put more in and go overboard to kind of escape that kind of, is it going to be 11 minutes or 11 and a half minutes, almost like that kind of thing. Is there anyone else with any other thoughts or questions, or any other thoughts from today's task as well? Any other kind of thing? Yeah.
Can I just ask Penny, did she get a second opinion from someone else about
Oh gosh,
I was feeling a little,
Yeah, no, I was very bleak. I didn't want to actually hear myself after that one. And I mean, the story when I presented it as a print was like a big success, but when we did it a podcast, no, I think it was just, I've listened to so many podcasts now, and I've looked at News 24 and how they've done their series, and I see how, when you're speaking about adding characters and making it almost like, changing into storytelling. I think I was doing it more as a reporting story and adding in, the people. So I understand where, when you're talking about how you do the script and you develop the character and the voice, obviously that's to keep the readers, the listeners engaged. So yeah. But no,
it's true, right? It's like without those elements, like, people will, like, their attention will wane, right? If you don't kind of give someone a reason to keep listening, then they will kind of drop off. But yeah, it's a good point, and it is hard to get a second opinion, right, in these things. It's impossible. It's not. Newsrooms are essentially a dictatorship. They're not really a democracy. Gail, you had a question. Go for it. Or Moses, sorry.
Hi everyone. Hope I'm loud and clear.
Yeah, definitely.
It's my first time to be participating in podcast training, and I'm just wondering how to come out with a podcast script. Do you have some illustrative examples on how to come out with a podcast script? Is it quite the same, like one is drafting a program script in the radio station, or is quite different?
Yes, that's a great question. I was actually thinking of doing that. I can put would an example of a podcast episode script be useful? Maybe I can post that in the chat, and I'll post the episode as well. So I'll post the audio and the script. Yes, let me do that. I think that's a great idea. And also to kind of answer your question, it's like, you know, there is a sort of set, you know, there are obviously sort of set ways to do it in terms of clarity, but at the other hand, it's also like it's not as rigid as some kind of as a lot of radio ideas of like it has to be in a certain format in that way, right? Because the way sort of podcast scripting has kind of evolved is a little bit looser. But I'll when I started scripting for podcasts, I looked at a whole lot of them and kind of you sort of develop your own, you pick and choose like things that you want and sort of develop your own style in certain ways. So yeah, I think it'll be really useful to like put, so you guys can look at the script and look at the audio and kind of see how it goes. Like often with kind of scripting, I often find that like it's a process that kind of takes a while. It takes a long time, but also like takes a number of goes, right? So you kind of like often you have a whole lot of ideas and you want to get those down, and you have a lot of memories of what happened when you were out in the field or when you did an interview or something like that. And it can sort of help to just get that down and in the roughest sort of way, just like that sense of like voiceover, what happened, what you remember happened in the interview or the clip or when you went out in the field or something like that, and to just kind of stack it out like that. I mean, a lot like radio scripting, you are, or video documentary scripting, you are sort of building this thing like line by line by line. And I think that's something that when I've done sort of consulting for people that haven't had any audio experience, that's often a thing that they really struggle with, is kind of that thing when they've been working in print. And now it's a case of like, okay, but every line has opportunity to move a story forward, but every line has the opportunity to sort of lose your listener as well, which is kind of that scary thing. But if you're coming from radio, it's almost like easing up a little bit. Part of it is length, and not that you want to pad things, right? But it's easing things up in a sense of like adding more detail and more action and more things that will give a listener something to latch onto, which can be kind of difficult if you're from a radio background. You're so conditioned, because I was in radio for a bunch of years, and it's sort of conditioning yourself to kind of be like, okay, it's okay to and the brevity of working in sort of radio and broadcast is really great. Like that's what you want. But at the same time, you kind of got to recondition yourself to be like, it's okay to add more in. So I'll post both those things in the chat, and hopefully it'll be a good comparison for you guys to have a look at. Great. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thank you. What else? What else do people have? Is there any thoughts on the task that we did for today or the task for tomorrow? Any questions or anything like that? Or any thoughts or comments that anyone's got?
Yeah, I have a question, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, guys. Everyone, good afternoon. I have a email. I also showed the prices for the walls to explore what I was doing for the blooper characters and the fact they had. So there will be several voiceovers and sounded on my episode. So what kind of script do you recommend for me?
What kind of script? Well, I mean, the thing is that like with these kind of things, it's like your script has to have clarity for the other people that are going to see it, right? So, I mean, that, you know, if you're working in a big organization and like many people have to see it, then maybe you need to agree on some sort of formatting parameters. But if you're working in a small team where you've got like people doing voiceover and people doing producing and then sound editing and then sound engineering, like your script kind of has to just have an ability to be understood by the people that are going to see it. I mean, that's the most important thing. And I think like when I was doing scripts, I don't know if I've got an example of this that I can share with you, but when I was doing scripts as well, I used to write a lot of directions for those people that I knew that would see the script. I would write those directions in. I don't know if they appreciated it or not, or they just thought I was being like micromanaging them. But I did find it helpful, especially in the learning process to be like, this is how this would sound, because there's also almost like stage directions in a play. There's also like editing instructions that you can have, and you can communicate those by sitting next to someone or editing yourself or in that way. But often it can kind of help to kind of allow you to imagine how it's going to sound. If it's helpful to you to put those in the script, then definitely do that. It's sort of that old school script writing idea of like being as fewer words as possible. But then you often find that a lot of people that write scripts, they also put an incredible amount of detail and incredible amount of information in their scripts, and it's only really what's taught at script writing school is like to use very few words. But so if you have ideas for how you want things to sound, like if you have ideas for and we'll talk a little bit later in the week about music and about sound effects. And I just want to break it to everyone that, I mean, obviously it's everyone's decision, but I am a huge I'm not a fan of sound effects unless they have been authentically collected. Like in terms of atmospheric sound, I'm a big fan of, but you do find some podcasts that use sound effects that haven't been collected. Like, so if someone goes into a courtroom, then they will just have like generic courtroom sound from YouTube. And yeah, I mean, we can debate that, but there is a sort of sense of like, that's a little bit inauthentic and sort of suggests that you went somewhere or with a microphone that you didn't. And there's sort of like an ethical question in that. But then there's also an ethical question to using, I've heard other quite senior journalists claim that using music in audio or television documentary is also unethical, right? Because it's kind of manipulative. And I do agree that it's manipulative, but it's also a very good tool to kind of bring people along your story. So we can kind of debate that a little bit later in the week. Is there any other questions or thoughts?
Matt, my question is answered. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure, go for it.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask quickly if, in terms of doing a story like that is almost retrospectively,
yeah,
how would that work in that sense? Are we writing a script in present tense as if it's happening now? Or would you write a script in the past tense? And obviously depending on who's narrating or whatnot.
Yeah.
How because usually in broadcast, for instance, we want to write things as if they're happening now.
Yeah.
In the present tense. So if, for instance, my story is something that is retrospective, I did the interviews and everything else. It just never got published for other reasons. But if one were to do that and go back and sort of just like speak to some people or just use some of the stuff that I already have, what kind of tense are we using? And also, like is it still applicable basically to do a story that?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a brilliant question. And I think it's kind of the sense of like, and I think it's true, right? With broadcast, you do want things to be in the present, and in podcast, you definitely want that sense of immediacy, especially if you've got a scene where you've gone out somewhere and you've got atmospheric sounds all very like tangibly in the present tense. And that's exactly the same. Yeah, I mean, my answer is vague, but hopefully it makes more sense, is that you need to kind of decide where the present is for your story. And often you can plot that. Often, I've in the past had like big sheets of paper with like different colors of like timelines and things like that, because, if you're telling a story that happened, I mean, one series I did took place in like the mid 90s. And it also took place 2 years before I started reporting, if that makes sense, right? So you had almost like your current investigation that is like,
Right.
you know, you going around talking to people and finding things out, like paperwork and stuff like that. But then you had like a story that was happening in a few years in the past. Then you had another story that was happening like 20 years in the past.
Right.
And it's I mean, yeah, it's a total headache in that it's very fun to do, but it is like a total nightmare. But yeah, I mean, you can choose, right? I think the best way is to like feel that you're in control, but like to be very, I mean, this is where like things like getting people to listen to things, even scripts, like people will probably understand it, but then they might not understand it if they're just listening to it. So this is where this kind of thing of getting someone to listen to something is very important, because people can get very lost in time. You don't have the ability in with visuals to be like to flash it up on a screen like 1996,
Right.
you know, which is a really interesting thing, right? When you start working in audio more, and then you look at TV, you're like, oh, you can just like change, you can just flash up that, but then you know you can say back in 1996, but if someone doesn't hear that little thing, then they're like, where are we and what's happening? So I guess that's a long way to say that like it is a challenge, and but not to shy away from that challenge, to be like quite clear that people will, it's in my mind like one of the hardest things to kind of communicate is this like almost time travel kind of thing in audio, because you don't have the visual cues and techniques. If you think about in like some films, they'll like change the color grade if you go into a or go black and white and stuff like that, so you don't have any of those luxuries. And it's almost like sometimes you need to shuffle parts of your story around to make sure that maybe everything that happened in 1996 or whatever happens in one episode, maybe, you know, that you don't have to do that, but like that might be a way to do it. But like I will say that like having a clear sense of time, like where you are in terms of the journalist investigating, I think is crucial, because I think some people, when they're doing this and they hit these problems, they sort of shy away from that. I listened to a BBC series quite recently where they weren't clear with like where they were interviewing their main subjects, and and she was like in a camp, right? So she was in a refugee camp, and you know that like she's in this camp. If you know anything about the story, which most people did before they went in, you know that she's in a refugee camp. So you know she's not in a studio, and you know that she's not, you know they didn't interview her like 10 years ago, right? And the fact that they didn't like weren't upfront about that and weren't clear about it, like just makes you the whole time like kind of second guessing and kind of not trusting what's going on. So even though you are sometimes, if you're doing like a historical look back, you are trying to build the sense of like this happened that year, that happened this year, and maybe you'll interview someone in the present day and they will talk back about those things. That's obviously a great way to do it. But I think being disingenuous about where your subject is and when they are, you know, it's one thing to kind of get away with it or whatever, but I think most of the time people just kind of know, right? They just know like, and they'll figure it out eventually, and that kind of compromises your whole story. And there can be something kind of interesting with this idea of like, you interviewed someone today and then now they're speaking back about something that happened in the past, and then that raises other questions around like if they remembered it properly, you know, all those sorts of things, which can be rich sources of information, right? I think.
Right.
I don't know if that really answers the question. I mean, I guess the point is it's a great thing to bring up, because it is a real challenge, and it can and a lot of like very professional investigative podcast series like really trip up on it. They just like just have no idea where they are or where they're going or where they've been, and otherwise have very good stories, but like you get quite lost. So yeah, it's a good thing to bring up. Very good and cool. Razia, you have your hand up.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you. This course is not for the faint-hearted. This is really hard.
Yeah.
I was trying to do yesterday's work, and then I was thinking that all those things that you asked, and then I learned that in most of these things, we just produce things. We don't really think broadly in terms of some of the issues that you've raised. So my question for today is, I'm looking at today's tasks, where you say that write the script for the first proper scene of your series. Start with the voiceover, work in audio clips. So my understanding is that to set up the scene for my first episode, for my case, is I'll just be interviewing people, and these are people who have done different things. So for me, I'm just thinking aloud. For me, to do that voiceover would be probably to talk about either statistics or probably talk about the overview of the industry and what is happening, so that when I bring these people to talk about that, people will have an idea. Is that what I am supposed to? Well, that's my thinking, because guys or do anything because my mind is just straightforward. Or how do I do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to in this at all like tell people like this is the right way or the wrong way in that way, right? You know, because obviously there are a million ways to do this kind of thing. I guess the sort of shift from like doing certain like news, like bulletin type stories and things like that to like this kind of storytelling is to like maybe is to lead with either character or action, right? So that's often like where you can grab people in a way, and then once you have them, the sort of idea is like then you would then release what you're saying in terms of statistics and information in that way. Like, you know, once people are gripped by like what is going to happen next to something that they might kind of care about, I kind of feel that they're much more likely to kind of absorb drier like information. So on the one hand, you can definitely do it however you like, but I guess the way that I would encourage people to do it is to kind of think about it in terms of like story first, and kind of think about it in terms of like a character and a scene and what is happening in that, and to kind of and I guess think about how to weave in not complicated, but like information, like facts, right? To weave in facts in between this setting of a scene and a character and frankly like action. Like that's kind of where people want these things. Like audio is very, very good. It's bad in terms of it being linear, and if people miss a bit then they get lost, but it's great in terms of like moving people through action quite quickly and quite inventively. So if you can kind of create a character and a scene and give them something to do, and how they're explaining, or you know, and obviously it's audio, right? So they're explaining what they have done or what they want to do or what they have done, you know, and that's kind of action. Once you've done that, people are a lot more susceptible to kind of receiving the overview information type stuff that you were talking about, rather than the sense of like front loading it there and then moving on. You know, there's sort of that you know, I mean, it's a kind of I guess it's sort of like a theory, but like that's what I would suggest. Princess, you have your hand up. Oh, Martha on WhatsApp as well. Do you want to speak? Yeah. Oh no.
To speak. I wanted to ask a question.
Oh wait, we got two platforms to Princess, can you just give 1 minute? I think Martha's just going to ask on WhatsApp. Go for it, Martha.
Okay.
I'm a South Sudanese journalist, so just I want to know, I want your observation about people and government. Because we face a lot as investigation journalists.
Mm-hmm.
If you read a fact story, they want to change it to what they want to know about this. Even if you bring your story and audio,
yeah,
change later on because the publishing of the story. And as national security, they will change the history totally. And the people, they know the fact about, they know the reality about the history. Even they are aware. What can I do in that situation?
I just so I get it right. So do you mean that like people, like your editors are changing it, or other people are like I sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, the government.
The government. Yeah.
Yes. They will change your history. Every evening before the publishing, they change some fact in the history, they change it.
Okay, so they're sort of censoring, they're like censoring your story, essentially.
Yes. So what can I do as an investigation journalist? Because it is not easy.
No.
Investigation journalist. Okay? They will look after you, what you say, what you write. So I need to ask a question in that, please.
Jeez, well that is, I mean, I'd like to ask.
If you get the story and they're aware about it and they change the story, they will say you are the one, you did not tell the truth. So what can I do in that case?
Yeah, I mean that is very difficult. I mean, I'd love to hear if anyone else had any thoughts in that, in terms of what country did you say you were in?
South Sudan.
You're in South Sudan. Okay, okay. We've got a few people from South Sudan on the course. Maybe we can, I don't know if anyone else has anything, like, I don't want to try and dictate what, we're actually working on a series based in South Sudan, which is really, I'm learning a lot about South Sudan, and my heart goes out to any journalist there. But I wouldn't want to dictate to you how it works there. Is there anyone else who has any thoughts on that? Yeah. Emmanuel.
Yeah.
I am called Emmanuel, but several times I think we have engaged with you in other previous calls.
Yes.
Together with our papa in the previous calls that we met.
Yes.
Of that country, South Sudan, what our colleague on the call is saying is really true, because there's media censorship by national security government officials. You may want to publish the facts, but when you publish the facts, you must be able to risk your life in that country. If you want it to go the way it is, yes, it can go, but at the end of the day, you should be able to risk your life. If they sympathize with you, the media personalities, before the material goes to the print, they will require the copy of publication to go through their desk. Of course, they have established offices in most of the print media houses. If any story goes out that is of national interest, they will scrap it out. They will remove it out.
I mean, maybe what I can suggest, Martha, maybe what we can do is offline, not offline, online, but off this call, I can introduce you to some people and we can have a chat about it in more specific detail. And yeah, I'd love to be able to help where I can, but yeah, I think we can definitely talk a bit more about this. Sure. This call's going to run out on Zoom, but Princess, I just wanted, you wanted to speak. Sorry for cutting you off there. What did you want to say? Princess, are you there? Okay, I think she's gone. Okay. Unfortunately, this call. Oh yeah. Yeah. No worries, no worries. Manuel, thanks so much. Is he there? Very loud.
Sorry, of some people who don't speak English. Is there a facility for interpretation or something? So how do I combine it so that it gets a wider reach?
Are you talking about your podcast?
Yeah. If I eventually, yeah.
What language do you want to translate it into?
Usually many of them will speak the Igbo language, that's of the southeastern Nigeria language, and I want it into English.
Oh, do you want to convert it into English?
Yes.
Yes, there's some tools that there's like the way we've done it in the past is like just with transcription tools, right? So you can transcribe it and then translate it. Would that be useful? Like with something like that?
Okay.
I think that's
I was just wondering if it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's also useful, even if you don't reproduce the audio, can be useful to just put the translated transcription up for people. That can be a big way to reach an audience in some way. I'll post some tools. We're starting like a sort of a directory of tools for people to access. So I'll post some of those in the chat as well.
All right, thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for this. I know it's a tight time, but please feel free to post more in the chat and we'll discuss more or get in contact with me directly on WhatsApp if you have any questions about the task for tomorrow. But I'm really excited by all the enthusiasm for it, and I really am appreciative that you guys are all here. So thank you so much. But we'll speak again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Chief.
Paul.